So for this project, I decided I wanted to read The Diary of a Young Girl written by Anne Frank. I'm really happy I decided to read this book. It's something that I've been meaning to get around to doing, but being able to actually take the time to read about her life has brought a lot of insight to pretty much the Holocaust in general. Um, Being able to gain that perspective of someone who is so close to my age during this time was actually pretty cool to actually read, because I found myself getting more emotionally involved in her story, because seeing her go from a 13-year-old girl who does what any 13-year-old girl would do, writing in a diary. She writes about things like her crushes and people who like her, or things with her friends, and then to see that change into where she's writing about insightful and deep thoughts about her future. Because I think that's one of the saddest things, because we can see how she's thinking about what her future's gonna be like, how she's gonna be a writer, how she aspires to be that, and who she's gonna marry. And to think that that was all taken away from her in such an unfair way because her life was taken away, it's just one of those things that it was very hard to read. I think the first thing that really stood out to me about this book is that it's not just her family inside her secret annex. I mean, there's her family, there's the Van Don family, and then there's also their acquaintance there. Because, I mean, like, to think that there's all these people in such a small little place, that must have been just so stinky and gross, and I just don't know how she could have handled that, because she went from, based off of like kind of what I got from, I mean, her life, I take her as someone who's pretty wealthy. I mean, for especially during those times, like for her birthday, she would get jewelry or books or things like that. So from living in those conditions to having to go to this small confined space where she doesn't even have a wide selection of clothes, she maybe has 1 or 3 pairs of clothing, to I mean, she doesn't even get her own bath. She has to share the bath water. She can't even go to the bathroom in private. It's just a very abrupt, life-changing thing. And you can see as she begins to mature, and she has to mature so quickly. And I mean, I think that was kind of tough to hear. I think the second thing that really stood out to me and kind of really sucked to read, and it touched me, or not really touched me, but like I guess it got me in places that I wasn't expecting, was the relationship between her and her mom. Um, they they honestly didn't really have a relationship in the book, and I find that so hard to understand, because I would think throughout this tough time you would want your family, you know, around you, that love and support and care. But between her and her mom, they didn't have that. And it was really hard to see, because it was hurting Anne and it was hurting her mom. And to think that there's just no love there, that was honestly one of the hardest things to read. But on a, I guess, a higher note, one of the cooler things to read is how her relationship with Peter, the son of Mr. and Mrs. Van Don, began to become such an important part in Anne's life. He was like, I mean, she first thought of him as kind of like obnoxious and lazy, but he eventually became someone who she could rely on and open up to. And for someone who struggled with opening up to like her friends and her family, she's able to think like, this is my opportunity to really open up, and she relies on him, and he actually is her first kiss. It's a very endearing relationship that we get to see. And I think it's super cool that throughout this tough time, she's still able to find, I mean, love is still able to prosper, I guess, and there's still hope there, you know? And I think that was also one of the coolest things. But I definitely think that if you are interested in learning about the Holocaust and exactly what life was like trying to hide from that, I mean, this book is the book for you, because you're able to see the insight of just the living conditions that they had to go through. To think that for some periods of times they would have to stay completely still for hours upon hours because they couldn't move, because they were afraid that someone was going to hear them. That's something that it's very hard to understand. It's something, reading this book, it's not like reading a textbook, obviously. But things that you learn in a textbook, it's nothing compared to this book, because you're able to understand a real life application of exactly what was going on, the exact motions of someone during this time. You can't learn the things that you are able to learn in this book from a textbook. Because yes, we read about the Holocaust, we hear about it, we study it, but sometimes we don't truly fully grasp just how terrible the living conditions were and how terrifying it was. And to think that when she died, she didn't even realize, I don't think she ever really realized just how big of an impact she was going to have on our history, on our lives, like now, because she's become such a big voice in our history and in our past that it's honestly, it's something that I'm very grateful to have and able to see. So if you honestly want to know how life was like during this time and how hiding was, like how horrible these conditions were, I think it's honestly a very good read and something that I think everyone should read. It's a very sad book and it took a lot out of me, but I do think it's super important. So please take the time to read this book if you are interested in it and you are interested in learning more about the Holocaust and just how terrible those conditions were, and you can actually relate to it more. Please read this book. So yeah, that's my book report. Thank you.